Ready? We'll call the meeting to order. I will begin by acknowledging that we are in Treaty 1 territory and the traditional homeland of the Métis Nation. I'll introduce the panel members. Robert Phillip to my far left, Cynthia Stevens to my left. Our assessor today is Merrick Cronin, and our administrative assistant today is Huda Aziz, and I'm Marcel Durando. I will be chairing. We will be hearing applications for revision of assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we will limit discussions to those matters. The statements that applicants or the assessor make at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matter must be sworn in. Be advised that comparisons of assessment of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the Board of Revision. The Board of Revision is appointed annually by Council and is independent of it and the City Administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the Board's decision with respect to the application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Court if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or the Court of Queen's Bench if the matter pertains to an application of exemption from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with the Board order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the matters to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony followed by questions that the applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave and the process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all the applications have been heard, and the Board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You will then receive the order by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. You can swear them in. Please put your phones on silent.
Would you like to swear in or refer?
I'll swear.
Okay. Please state your full name.
Merrick Frolick.
And do you swear the evidence you're representing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Would you like to swear in or refer? Please state your full name.
Trevor Smith.
And you swear the evidence you represent is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
First property on the docket today will be 2-1147 Notre Dame. Mr. Frolick, when you are ready.
Yeah, for sure. File number is 19963. Roll number is 130990711310. And the assessed value for this property is $2,845,000. The parcel uses it's under condo industrial. It's the old Mr. Christie building on Notre Dame. It's a one-story building. The actual years built range from 1931 to 1953, and we have an effective year built for this property of 1975. Wall height is 29 feet. We have a leasable area of 40,380. I've never been into this property. The pictures that we have are actually ones that were obtained from Mr. Smith's previous hearing on this property. Pages 2 and 3 show the following pictures. And pages 4 show the location of the building, where it's on Notre Dame, just west of McPhillips, before Weston Street, then Aaron and Wall. And on the top of page 4 shows just how it's a garment factory, sewing machine factory. Property is classified as being a manufacturing light. Stated 48,380 square feet at $6.56 net per square foot, to come up with $314,470, using a vacancy loss of 6%, expenses of 2%, and a shortfall of $375. We come up with a net operating income of $278,804. So what we've done with this property is that the rent may seem a bit higher than what it is, but we also have a normally higher cap rate than usually. This 9.8% cap rate is one of the highest cap rates that we have in the industrial section. And that will be confirmed when you're looking at the next page. Page 6 shows some comparables in the neighborhood. They're ranging in rents from $3.50 to like $5.50. The reason I've stated is there's a mono generator here at $6.50, but to compensate for the higher rent that we've used, we used a higher cap rate. When we're using the capitalization rates here, when we're looking at industrial section, you can see that the City of Winnipeg parameters is from 5.5 to 9.8. We got the 9.8 cap rate for this property. On page 8, it's looking at what we've done in terms of our cap rate study with the properties that we've used. All of us have heard all this, the argument before with regards to non-recoverable expense sampling as well, and why we feel comfortable with only using the 2% as non-recoverable expenses. We follow all IAAO standards, and that concludes my formal presentation. Thank you.
Questions, Mr. Smith?
Yes, just a couple, really. Subject property is considerably older property. I guess you would agree?
Yes.
Built in 53. The location of the subject, it's not really in a standard industrial park or anything, is it?
Well, 50 years ago, it would have been in the standard industrial park, but as the city has grown, there's been no industrial parks that have been created, so it's an older industrial use area.
Okay. That's fair. I'm looking at your page number 6 here, and the rent comparables here. When I went through this, I see if you do the work on the properties, the average is $4.40 a square foot, and the weighted average is $4.26 a square foot for the comparables. Is that accurate?
That is accurate.
Okay. And of the comparables, the majority of them are either at $5 or under, correct?
That is correct.
Would that not point towards a rental rate in the $5 range?
When you look at the market valuations, what we've done in the circumstances is that we've adjusted the cap rate to be more reflective of the overall market value of it. We don't pick and choose parameters that are suitable to justify a lower assessment.
All right. Looking at page number 8, and this has been mentioned before, the first capitalization rate at 90 Park Lane, the city is aware that that was bought by an owner-occupant, and that there was no lease in place or revenue at the time of purchase, so there would be no cap rate to be developed.
I disagree with that position. And here's maybe something that you may be able to understand. Say if someone gets a promotion to a job in Calgary or Vancouver, and they're vacated their house, and they're not living there for 3 months, and then all of a sudden, eventually their house sells. Do we assume that that house has no value, or that we can't do an income valuation on that, or do we assume that just because it's 3 months away, you can't take the data or the sales history to use that to come up with a value for our property? So what we did in our analysis is that we looked at the history for that property, what the income showed, and that's how we developed our cap rate.
So you looked at prior revenue on the property, despite the fact that the property was not bought as an income property.
Well, but there was value associated with it because the sale price for that property would not be derived on the cost approach. The sale price for that property may or may not have been applied by the direct comparison approach. So what we did is we looked at the history of the income approach to value to develop our cap rate to use it for our cap rate study.
So I have, and I understand your original comments, nobody's disputing that there's value to a property, whether it's bought by an owner-occupant or by an investor. We're simply dealing with the theory and mechanics of developing a cap rate, and when there's no revenue in place and it's not bought for that purpose, clearly there's no cap rate to be developed. Those are all of my questions.
Cynthia?
So if a property is of an age to warrant a high cap rate, and it also can't command a certain amount of rent, is there some reason why you wouldn't just apply both?
It happens, the rent that we're using is not that unreasonable for it, the comparables that we have here, because the comparables that we have are within that period of time. And I feel comfortable with the rent that we've used for this. It's just, I'm looking at the overall market value for this property. It was cut to $2.38 million from the 2018 appeal period. We know that market values haven't gone down in value. And I feel comfortable with the overall value for this property.
Because your highest comp is 550.
And Mr. Smith has pointed that out, yes, and I understand that.
Okay, that's all I have, thanks.
I have no questions.
You said the previous assessment was at $2,381,000?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Page 1.
I guess I think it might have been you, Mayor, you told me this in the past, but the rents are what affect the business tax, is it not?
Well, yeah,
We do the
business tax
tax.
is based on rent, yes.
And so it's based on the rent. So should that not be what we're adjusting rather than the cap rate? And I was told that by an assessor, actually.
Well, you know, what we'll look
I
at,
know you're chasing a number, because you said you're chasing a number.
yeah, well, I am following the model that's been created here today.
But your rental numbers, for your rent comparables, do bring it closer to the $5
Oh, yeah,
range.
for sure. Yeah.
So could you not go closer to the rental and bring the
Yeah.
cap rate down?
I had made a recommendation to Mr. Smith that I thought was fair.
Well, we're not aware of that. so
Yeah,
we're not gonna-
and so at the end of the day, it was significant. It would have been an adjustment of the rent, and so we're here because we can accept my number.
Okay, thank you. On with your presentation.
All right. So we're dealing with unit number 2, 1147 Notre Dame Avenue. I'll just direct the panel to the very back of my brief here. Last 2 pages. You can see the border revision decision from the last cycle on the second last page there, 1147 Notre Dame Avenue. Originally, this property in the last cycle was not condominiumized. It was still had the Christie's Biscuits portion of the original property attached to this one, so you can see that in the decision. That section of the property was attached. Now, the part to focus on is the reduction to the property that we're discussing here today, which is the portion that's classified, class code 60, other properties. So you can see that it was reduced in the last cycle from $3,869,000 to $2,381,000, and that the decision was based on the applicant's evidence. The following page gives you the evidence that I presented in that hearing, and you can see that at that time the rental rate that we would utilize was $4.75 a square foot, with a cap rate of 8% in that cycle. The city of Winnipeg at that time had a rental rate of $6.65 a square foot and a cap rate of 7%, which generated their $3,869,000. That was a model generated valuation, I'm assuming, from the city of Winnipeg. If we move forward to this cycle, and again, just looking at the city's evidence before we look at mine, if you look at the rental rate comparables on page 6, they certainly point to a rental rate in and around the $5 per square foot range based on the evidence submitted there. We have some older properties, not quite as old as the subject. Well, a couple of them are at Henry and Sargent, 350, 450, some lower ceiling heights. Then we have Slightly more modern one on white, built in 1966, 28-foot ceiling heights at $340, following on up at the same location, $5.07 a square foot, similar sizes, etc. So these were not comparables that I had available, but if you look at them with relation to the market rent that we proposed for the subject property, I think they're certainly supportive. Moving into our valuation itself, page number 1, you can see the appeal history of the subject property, 2016-17, the overall, the section of the property was reduced from $3,488,000 to $2,252,000. 2018 we've already discussed. We now have the market value for the subject property at $2,456,000, obviously an increase over the decision from the last cycle. Subject property built in 1953. It is a manufacturing facility, NWG Apparel. They do produce garments, and it is, you'll see that from the photos once we get into it. Land to plan area ratio is very low at 1.91 to 1, and we have an exterior wall height from the City of Winnipeg's online information of 22 feet. Moving into the subject itself, you can see the exteriors on page number 2. And number 3, what I will point out here is the access and loading. So once we get to the site aerial, you'll see the difficulties with that. The actual loading port is shown at the bottom of page 2, but the access to it is shown at the top of page 2 as well as the top of page 3. And you can see how tight it would be to get any significant size truck in there. The interiors of the building are shown on page 4 and 5, small office area, and then the original manufacturing section, and you can see the production facility itself. Description of the improvements are on page number 6. And the property was built, as stated, in 1953. It hasn't significantly changed since that time. So the original date of construction is fairly indicative of the structure. Obviously, there's been renovations in putting in the office area, etc. Further description is there for you. With regard to the site itself, so looking at my page number 7 in the site aerial, the property is accessed off of Notre Dame and Myrtle, so you would turn northwards on Myrtle, and then the actual access to the property, you take a left turn off of Myrtle, and the site itself is outlined there. Now, the site is highlighted in blue, so it's a little difficult to see, but the turning radius that you have to get around the neighboring building and this building itself, with the car parking along the neighboring building, which is dedicated parking to the tenancy for the WRHA, which is the tenant that occupies the building that fronts right on Notre Dame there. They have dedicated parking along the adjacent building there, which makes the laneway very, very tight. Obviously, access to that truck staging area is fairly restricted and does create an issue, and would obviously drive a lower rent on the open market. Subject property is owner occupied, so we do not have a lease in place, so we need to go to the market to look for rental comparables. We've already covered the city's material. Our rental rate study is on page number 11. I'm happy to go through them if you wish. I've got all of the detail here for you. Suffice it to say, when we go through this, most of these properties are significantly newer and somewhat better located than the subject property. Some varying wall heights and sizes, obviously. They are generally pointing towards framing a rental rate of $5 per square foot. We can go through those in detail, but I'll leave it there for now. The top rental comparables are also in play. So we have a low-end rent of $3.15 a square foot, up to the high end of $5.25 per square foot. Subject property is older, ceiling height of 22, exterior wall height of 22 feet. The size of the subject itself at just under 50,000 square feet. There are less tenants for this. Certainly there's less tenants for a property of this age and vintage. And build out in the Winnipeg marketplace, the rental rate of $5 a square foot is well supported by both our information as well as the city's. We can move on to the expense side. The vacancy statistics are shown at the top of the page. If you look at investment vacancy in the City of Winnipeg market, either investment, single tenant, or multi-tenant, we're looking in and around that 7% range. We've used the 7% vacancy allowance in our valuation of the subject. The expense allowance, we've covered this material many times. Suffice it to say, we are asking for the 5% and the 2%. I do have my standard rebuttal information to submit at the end of the hearing here, but I'm not going to run through that for the 20th time here. I think everybody on the panel has probably heard extensively about that. I'm happy to answer any particular questions you might have, but suffice it to say, we're simply asking for the reinstitution of the 5% non-recoverable in addition to the 2% non-recoverable. The shortfall allowance, the actual shortfall for the building would come out to approximately $7.70 a square foot at year-end 2017. We're not asking for that. We're simply asking for the $3.75 a square foot as appropriate for the subject. Move on to capitalization rate. The main commercial brokerages, or two of them, in City of Winnipeg, their cap rate studies we've discussed many times. They're pointing to a range for investment grade properties of between 6.5 and 7.25 for Colliers, and 6% and 7.25% for C.B. Richard Ellis. Again, this is for investment grade properties. We're dealing with a 1953 grade manufacturing property in an older non-standard industrial area. This would not qualify as investment grade. We have made an adjustment to the cap rate to 8%. To reflect this. It's an older single occupant building and would not draw the same interest from investors in the market as anything more modern and better located. So in applying the 8%, we come to our market value of $2,456,000. The cap rate material is presented there for you. I gather that we're going to hear some additional information regarding one particular property, and I look forward to making any particular corrections that may be required. The information that we had was such that the capitalization rates presented were researched and were shown to be accurate at the time. But if there's new information, I'm happy to hear such. The addendum materials include the income and expense, some supportive decisions with regard to the non-recoverable issue, and we've already looked at the decision from the 2018 cycle. Any questions? Thanks. Yeah, there's one for everybody.
Mayor, questions?
Yeah, sure. On your rents that you used here today, do you believe in economies of scale?
I do.
Okay. So a lot of your subject property leases that you're using here are significantly almost twice the size of the subject property. Wouldn't an adjustment be required to compensate for that?
That would be, size is obviously one issue, but there's many other issues that go into driving the rent, so we would look at the entire package.
Okay, so you wouldn't just focus on one thing?
We wouldn't pick out size on its own, no.
Okay. And for two of your, on top of page 11, two of your leases that you're using here with the lower rates are almost a third less in terms of wall height. Wouldn't that impact the market rents derived as well?
You're looking at the top chart?
There's a Mission and Sherwin Road.
Yes, that would have an impact on the rent, and as you can see, we're higher than both of those.
Yeah. And with regards to some of your other properties that you used here, what's the actual vacancy of this building?
Well, as an owner-occupant, I think we're all aware that the vacancy is 0%, but in valuing a property for assessment or other purposes, one has to take into account vacancy in the valuation, as we're not looking at a single point in time. We're looking at the property over a span of time, and obviously buildings trade hands, they go vacant, they get bought for investment purposes. Vacancy needs to be accounted for.
Okay. So if the overall vacancy is 3%, yet you're using something that's more than twice that with your main tenant, because you have multi-tenanted stuff here, but you know the main driver for that is overall industry average, and you're asking for more than twice that?
Well, the statistics are shown in detail there at the top of page number 13. You can go through each of the categories. This is material taken from the Johnson report. I presented the overall industrial vacancy, which would be inclusive of all industrial properties. Then we have investment vacancy, then we have single tenant investment vacancy, and then we have multi-tenant. If you look at the property, or rather the categories there, we're generally looking at a 7% vacancy rate.
Mm-hmm. How come you didn't provide the information from the Stevenson report?
With regard to?
Vacancy.
I'm not sure that we had a specific. It's not material that I've included in my standard report. This is the accepted standard with regard to a study of vacancy in the city. Mr. Johnson does a very extensive review of the investment market and the owner-occupant market in the city. It's fairly reliable.
And other organizations do not?
Other organizations do their own studies, obviously.
And are they lower than your analysis?
This is not material we're looking at today, nor has it been presented. I'm not quite sure what we're getting into here. The city's vacancy rate is 6% for the subject properties.
That's, yeah, point
So
there,
you
point
would be
there.
roughly double what the overall industrial average vacancy would be as well. I think we're kind of quibbling over a small point here.
But every little bit counts, right? In terms of overall market valuation.
Correct.
Is there any reason why you don't include addresses when other tax agents and property owners provide addresses for their indexes when they're answered, or when you ask them to make the request, they usually answer emails?
So we're straying a bit far from the material here. This is a question that has come up within the last 2 weeks and has been asked and answered several times before the panel. The material with regard to the capitalization rates, we've indicated on page for the cap rates that we presented for industrial properties that we do have some clients where confidentiality is an issue, and we have not included these specific addresses for that reason. There's certainly enough information there for the city to do a bit of research and look at them if they so wish. This is not different than some other some other agents or indeed the city in the past with regard to identifying of specific properties, and I don't know that that's an issue that is particularly relevant.
Well, it's hard to question one's data if we don't have the access to the information. So for number 1, 3, and 5, we were able to confirm addresses on it. For number 4, we have no clue with regards to what address is on Waverly at $6,750,000.
Right.
And that's your highest cap rate that you have here. And so, you know, Waverly's a desirable area, and to have an 8.3% cap rate there when there are other cap rates in the neighborhood that are significantly lower. Like, you know, people may, just because other people aren't doing their due diligence and asking you questions on that, doesn't make it a deferral to not answer the question. So what's the address on Waverly?
I've already provided the answer on this, Mr. Pruitt, as I've noted several times that it's an issue that we can't bring forward, and nor, and I will point this out because I think it's important. I'm not standing on my own on this. This is this has been the case frequently for myself, other accountants, the city itself in past hearings. So we're not. There's no subterfuge or anything of that nature here. We're simply following accepted practice.
Then how can we test your data if we don't have access to the right information? Like, fundamentally, I'm here as an agent for the city of Winnipeg. I'm here representing all the tax base of the city of Winnipeg.
Right.
And if we can't quantify and ask questions about the data that you've presented here as evidence, how am I supposed to be able to do my job?
I think he's answered your question already. He's not going to give it under the issue of privacy.
Fair enough. That's understandable. Okay. So, with regards to, I do have so at the last hearing Mr. Smith and I were participating in, he had questioned how we do our cap rates.
So you're asking him a question right now?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So it's actually rebuttal information with regards to one of his cap rates.
Sure.
So there's 2 components of it. I'll take this one here for myself, and this one here. And you can hand out the rest individually.
This is the city.
Well, what I've done here is, as we go through the documents, I kept this copy so you could reference the authenticity of the information that I provided you, because it's a one-page cover. But what happens here is, as you look through my information, you can double-check it so you don't have to go back and forth. So that was the reason behind it. So when you look at the first page here, which is the same as the single-page handout here, we're dealing with the property at. Can you confirm, Mr. Smith, that the property that I'm looking at here on number 5 is 2081 Logan Avenue?
I think we've already covered this,
Okay.
Mr.
No problem. Fair enough. So based on our analysis, this is the information that I've been able to obtain for that. So if we look at, and this is how we do our model. So if we look at the very first page that I have here, which is 2081 Logan with the due date May 13th, May 3rd, 2013. We're showing what they provided us here for rent income and for net operating income that we based it on. So they're showing a net income of $122,026. The next page here shows that it is a net lease being represented in that. I am now looking at the due date that says May 6, 2014. That's for the 2013 mailer. They're showing a rent here of $134,986 and the net operating income of $117,269. Once again, the next page here shows that it is a net lease. I'm now looking at the income expense mailer provided for December 31st, 2014 with the May 5th, 2015 due date. They're showing a rental income of $142,147 at a net operating income of $125,365. This also is a 3-year net lease. So in 2015, for this property, in September 22nd, 2015, property sold for $2,250,000 on September 15th. So here's the income expense mailer that they had. Is the consideration paid correct? Yes, it is. And what date was the party agreed upon? In August of 2024. Was there an appraisal report done on this property? Yes, there was. There was an appraisal report stated at $2,435,000. This is what they used for the sales report. Looking at the information here, is office industrial warehouse. Property was in good condition. How do they finance this property? So 25% down at $562,000, financed at $1,637,000 at 75%, at a bank rate of 3.25%, to come up with the $2,250,000. The one question they asked here is, was the purchase price based on this property based on net operating income? They always say no. But what's interesting about this, there's an appraisal report, and the appraisal, the value that the sale price is always slightly lower than the sale price. And so if an appraisal was done, sale price is very low, very just underneath it, there must be a correlation between the two. Obviously, a bank's going to do their due diligence with regards to protecting their assets and their liability. So when we're looking at the overall value of this property, what it's sold for, it seems to be good. So now, as we look at this information, and I'm just going to highlight the front page here, which is the individual copy here. So if they're looking at the sale price, any buyer who would show proper due diligence would look at the income history of what is a fair market value for this price. They got an appraisal report done. They looked at the income stream. So based on the sale price and what the average net income was, what I've done here, so the 3-year average net income, and I'm actually referencing this little box here with regards to the work that we do at Assessment and Taxation to justify our cap rates and our position, is we have a 3-year average here of net income of $121,587. So if you just do the math here of the 3 years of the 125, 117, 122, it comes up with a 121,587. So if we take that over the sale price of $2,250,000, we come up with a cap rate of 5.4%. We know what commercial brokerage houses have and what ends up taking place here. They're showing 6.5 to 7.25. But this property here is northwest quadrant. It's in a decent location, so our cap rate here doesn't seem to be that unreasonable. What we've also done here is if we just prorated the income of 2015 over the full year, because they took over, so those months are from only October, November, December, the cap rate would be 5.93%. Right now, I'm referencing the board order. At the time here, this property was assessed at $2,236,000, and there was a cut that had taken place to $2,259,000, and the decision was based on the net operating income presented by the applicant and a cap rate of 6.75%. So what we're looking at here now is we're looking at the income and expense mailer from 2015, and you could show that my income is matching. So what I'm showing the total income for the 3 months is $139,791. We're showing you the non-recoverable expenses. We're showing the mortgage payments. We're coming up with an actual net income of $33,384. Times it by 4 for the entire year. It's $133,556. So good information here. You know, a person who was doing an appraisal on this would have used this information to come up with their normal market valuation. And now we're looking at this here. Page, the 2017 mailer shows the full year. So in 2017, what we have here is we have a reported net income of $43,077. If we add that with the mortgage payment of $101,898, we come up with an actual net income of $144,983. So as you can see by our analysis here, you know, the cap rate that's used at 7%, that's actually being very generous, and it should be a bit more aggressive. And based on the data here to justify the sale price, I feel quite comfortable with stating that it's hard for us to do our jobs properly if we don't have correct information. We were able to find this here because this was a smaller strip and we were able to locate it. But it's important to realize that, and we don't want to go through this exercise at a lot of time, but in the same regards, we need to be critical of the information that's provided here by the tax party. What I have here now, on the very last page, it's a post-reference sales listing.
And why are we looking at it?
Well, we're showing for the information of the quality of the product
The
here.
panel should probably consider the date of the material that is being discussed.
Well, we shouldn't be dealing with post.
Well, it's just to show the quality of the product here to justify the lower cap rate that we have. So what happens here is that we're not looking at a substandard product here.
We're not going to deal with the posting. We're not going to deal with the post.
Okay, fair enough. So that concludes my formal presentation with regards to our cap rate analysis on this. We're quite comfortable with a lower cap rate, but with a lot of information that we have here, by just sharing, by having not providing information so we can do proper analysis to represent the entire city of Winnipeg tax base, is doing a disservice to me as an assessor because I can't do my job properly. And moving forward, I'd like to see that changed.
Have to change the Privacy Act. Mr. Stevens, you have a question of his rebuttal?
It's an interesting presentation, certainly.
Based on actual evidence.
I think I'm asking
Let's just keep it to questions and let's not get into a debate, okay?
Did I hear you state that you were adding the mortgage financing to the revenue in order to come up with the NOI?
That's correct.
Was that what you stated?
Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
That's standard.
The decision from that particular property you had included here as well. I see that the decision was such that the property was reduced in value from roughly the sale price to the value shown, $2,059,000, not $2,259,000. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And how is it that the city of Winnipeg comes into possession of an appraisal document that's not written for the city of Winnipeg? How does that happen?
It's legislated under 16.1 with regards to sales verification process. We could ask information on income expense mailers, direct sales on sales, and cost reports.
Okay, so we have a lot of information here, none of which I have reviewed and I'm not commenting on for the reasons that we've already stated. You've isolated a single property, and as I had stated before, this issue has been asked and answered. If you had new information, we could have perhaps discussed this in advance. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, but it would have been nice if you could answer my emails with regards to this, which you chose not to.
I'd already answered it in the hearing, Mr. Philly. Well, let's move on. I have no further questions with regard to this. I think I'll do the rest in summation.
Do you have any questions of the assessor? Bob?
No.
None? And you can catch it in summation when you wrap it up. Right now we're still going to... You finished your question?
Yeah.
Do you have any questions of the appellant? Do you have any questions of the appellant?
I don't think I do, thank you, no.
Well, I think you've gone through it quite well. In your summation?
In my summation for this property, I did try to make a recommendation, so we wouldn't have to go through this exercise. They had it, it's his prerogative not to choose it. What I do find interesting with regard to Mr. Smith's answers is that he can't comment on the cap rate study that he's provided us. He has stated that he's done a thorough analysis with regards to the cap rate study, but he seems oblivious to the information that we presented here, which seems odd because
You know, there's a way of coming across, Merrick, and that's not one of them. One of our city parameters is written on the wall back there about respect. So let's try and do it mutually, okay?
Yeah, but it's frustrating when you get stolen.
Well, we can be frustrated, but let's choose our words carefully, please.
Okay, fair enough. We're as good as the information that we've provided here. I've tried to make a value that I felt was fair. I have nothing else to add. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have anything in summation? Mr. Smith?
Yeah, just briefly, looking at the valuation, yes, Mr. Felique had made a recommendation. We were not in agreement with it because we feel that we're being very fair, exceptionally fair in the value that we're presenting here to the city. You can see that we've stepped up from the prior cycle. After significant discussion regarding capitalization rate, you can see that our capitalization is 1.8% lower than the city of Winnipeg's. The rental rate that is applied to the subject property is supported both by our material as well as the city of Winnipeg's. I think the information stands for itself. If there's a reasonable proposal, I'm not opposed to accepting them as long as it's in the interest of the fairness and equity and of the client. But in this case, we did not feel that to be the case. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That closes that matter. You guys need a break before we go on to the next one?
That's okay, we can.
You good? Did you say yes? No, that's right. Okay, yeah, shut down for 5 minutes. We won't say what we call these breaks. Just take a minute to reply to this one because she wants to know if I'm here for this afternoon. We're up. We're back. We'll call the meeting to order. The next property that we're dealing with will be, let's get them sworn in first.
Oh, yes. Would you like to sign or first?
I'll sign.
Okay, please state your full name.
Slaughter?
And you swear the evidence you're about to present is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
We are doing
We're going to deal with, who knows what it is. I think it's the Boardroom property, is it not?
Yeah, sure.
For some reason, this doesn't have an address on it.
Well, I think the first one should be 1180, yeah, 970 Lumber.
Yeah, that's the first one we said. Okay, so if you want to read the information on that
Yeah,
one?
for sure. File number is 192881. Roll number is 1000-646-4300. The assessed value that we have today is $7,171,000. There's no product information details on that because there's a pending refund on this. So we're asking for the value to be confirmed, and there'll be a supplemental exam, and so we're asking for a 54-1.
You're in agreement with that?
Sorry, this is for 1180 Williams.
No, this is the first. I thought it was 970 Armor.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes, we agree with that.
You agree with that? Okay. Thank you.
It's just we're following the order right here.
Yeah, right, so,
And now we're going to view the Wilkes property.
okay.
And the next one is 1180 Wilkes Avenue.
It didn't, it had a, sorry, we're just.
Yeah, it had no address
It had no
on it.
address on here, even
You had
though
to
the
go-
address is
yeah.
on the, so
you had
it's
to go with the roll number.
it's roll number 192881.
The very first one on the top of your pile. Did you mix them all up now?
Very much so.
Okay.
We can leave that one down. Just look for your 1180 Wilkes. Robert,
Sorry?
find your 1180 Wilkes. That's the one we're dealing with now.
Okay.
Which also doesn't have anything on there.
And that, yeah, it's got the address on that one.
Oh, it does here, it didn't on there. Anyway, it doesn't matter. It's good, I got it.
Let me know when you've got it, Robert. Do you have the information? You got the...
Yeah, I
you
got it, folks.
Here?
I have it, yeah.
Okay, go ahead, Mayor.
File number is 192887. Roll number is 1000-646-4400. Address is 1180 Wilkes Avenue. Assessed value that we have for this property is $10,121,000. Condo industrial. 9 different premises here. Years built is between 2008 and 2012, with the wall heights varying from 17 to 25 feet. We have a land area of 137,826, and we have a leasable area of 52,521. We're asking that the assessed value of the property be confirmed. So what we have here is, this is some information that I found on page 2 with regards to the subject property, where it's located at, Southwest Winnipeg, recently constructed multi-tenanted facility, excellent on-site parking, exposure, HVAC throughout. Here's some pictures that are listed on page 3. Page 4 actually shows where it's located at, where the site is, and how it's located at the southwest quadrant of the city of Winnipeg. On December 4th, Mr. Slaughter and I had the opportunity to do an inspection of this property. I have additional pictures here if you wish. We took a lot of pictures that day because we went through the entire complex. And so there's only like 2 pages worth of pictures here, but I just wanted to show you some of the quality of the office space located on here. And actually, with regards to this property here, Rod, and if you could confirm this, I don't think there was much actual warehouse. It was like all flex warehouse, but I don't think when the 1180 Volks had much warehouse space, did they?
No, there's quite a bit. There's 2 units that are office. This is
Oh, that we
one-
didn't go to? Okay.
Yeah, we
Okay.
saw Prentville, which is an office.
Yeah.
And then we
Why
saw.
don't we get into that when he does his presentation, so we don't.
BASF, yeah, but I just wanted to show the nature of the office component on here, because some of the units we didn't have access to either. Property owners have been compliant with regards to completing their income and expense mailer information. Listed here is all their revenues and expenses. No sales of the property. On page 8, we just got a sampling of some of the leases that are here. We have a range from $10.75 to $19, and that's listed on page 8. Page 9 shows our workup with regards to what we have here. So we have the leasable areas here listed, and we're showing a range of rents from $11.68 to, I think, $14.82. The blended average is $12.80. 52,521 square feet, 2.5% for vacancy. We got expenses at 2%, shortfall at $375. To come up with a net operating income of $637,610, using an overall capitalization rate of 6.3. On page 10 just shows an example of all the comparables that we have in the neighborhood on Laurel and Rare, and they're all part of this complex here. So we're showing comparable rents that are from in range of in $12 range up to $16.25. Cap rate study that we use on page 11 shows us where this property would fit in the overall scale. Cap rate that we're using 6.3%, and it's a multi-tenanted property. It's 6.3%. It's a bit larger in size, so it's just on the outskirts of our 20th to 80th percentile. And on page 12, 13, 14, we talk about what we've done in terms of our cap rate study with regards to our non-recoverable expenses. That concludes my formal presentation.
Mr. Slaughter, you have questions?
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just one moment. Okay, thank you, Mr. Frolic. Just a couple questions then.
It's Frolic.
Frolic, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Keep thinking the hockey player
Yeah, I know.
so much.
Yeah, that's fine.
He wishes.
Yeah. You mentioned the brochure in your evidence, and just to be clear, that is for one unit within this property which has many different types of units.
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah. The property overall is considered a flex warehouse in which units will range in build-out from 0 to 100%. correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. The brochure mentioned excellent parking. You agree that some of that parking for this property is actually found on parcels which are separately assessed?
That is correct.
Okay. If those properties were merged into one, because just to be clear, they're common ownership, correct? And adjacent. If they were merged into one, would there be any additional value added for those parking spaces?
Well, I guess our position is with regard to that is that for industrial-sized properties, because this is industrial, it's just under our 4-to-1 ratio, but at 3.24. But I understand what you're saying with regards to the additional parking areas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. You wouldn't add any value if that was under one roll number for parking stalls?
No, as it stands right now, we haven't separated those additional parking stalls.
Okay. The non-recovered expenses, you mentioned the city has reduced that from a previous 7% total to 2%.
Yeah.
That includes the structural reserve component, in other words, all of the capital improvements which occur over the life of the property?
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Okay.
Because if you own any type of asset, you're going to be expected to do renovations at some point, yes.
Yeah, well, that would be more capital improvements, of course,
Correct.
not really renovations. But as far as renovations, tenant improvements, leasing commissions, other management-related costs, the allowance does not reflect those expenses anymore?
No, because we're following the guidelines set by the municipal board
Okay.
in terms of not including tenant inducements, free rent, commissions and whatnot.
So you agree that those expenses are incurred, in fact, they're shown on your page 5 evidence of the income expense questionnaire, correct?
Yeah, they show that, yeah, but for market valuation, we don't consider that.
Okay. That's all the questions, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that was sort of, my question was the NOI on the IME is significantly lower than yours.
Yeah.
And you're just saying that these expenses that are here are not part of what you would consider.
That's correct.
Okay. And you mentioned flex warehouse, so and that when you were going through it, so is a lot of it office space as opposed to warehouse? Or?
There are significant areas that are warehouse. More so on the other properties that are part of the replot.
Okay.
That that there's a warehouse component where you're dealing with ceiling heights that are 25 feet. Like the ones that I've included today, because when we went, some of them we didn't have access to, but that's the nature of the flex warehouse.
All right, that's all I had. Thank you.
Robert,
I have no questions.
is this part of the replot as well?
This one is not.
It's not, okay. If this was retail, what would the land-to-plan ratio be supposedly when they put it in? I mean, for retail, you'd require higher parking, would you not?
Yeah, and so it doesn't seem to be insufficient, and because some of it is retail, some of it's office, so it's truly a mixed bag. It's a flex warehouse, so we can't use the normal parameters that we would use for a retail shopping center.
Okay, so this is not part of the replot, but they're still using some of their neighboring lands for parking because there's just not enough parking space there.
Well, yeah, it's because of the nature of this building when it first built out and they separated it into all these different units. It wasn't. It's been a challenge, and so why they separated them the way they did, I can't comment on that.
Okay, I'll see what Mr. Slaughter's got for his evidence on that. On with your presentation. Why don't I have Mr. Slaughter's information here? Do we not have your packet?
I don't know.
I don't have it.
Does anyone else have this
have it.
document?
Yeah, I got that.
I got this. 1 second. It must be here then.
Yeah.
Maybe it was in the first file?
I think you just passed it. There? Yeah, gotcha. Okay. Yep.
That's it.
Okay. I just had it. Are you sure we got the first address right then? Because this was with the first one.
Well,
Did we check that roll number? I'm sorry, I just want to make sure I got this right,
Yeah.
guys. Because we had,
Yeah,
970 Lorimer.
File number.
because 970 Lorimer would just be the old roll number that we have for this property.
Okay, okay, I just had it, it was just one, that's right. Okay, we're ready.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the property is 1180 Wilkes, roll number 10-00646-4400. And on page 2 is a photograph of the property from 2 different angles. So it's a flex warehouse. And what happens with these type of multi-tenant properties is that the owner will build out finishes depending on the tenant's needs. So in some cases, they may require a significant amount of build-out for the purposes. In other cases, they'll keep it just as warehouse. At the end of the tenancy, whether or not anybody needs the finished space is a question of the market. Sometimes that space has to be removed and brought back to shell. But one of the important parts about, I guess, the discrepancy between the city and ourselves is, if I could draw your attention to page 3, you'll see an overhead map. Now, the subject property is kind of the right dead center. It's an L-shaped portion of the Lorimer properties. Dead center on the page. That's the subject. Right in the middle there.
This one here?
Yes.
This
yeah,
one?
That's right. That's correct. Yeah, that's it.
Not this?
That's the one where A&S has their office right in the corner?
They did. They've moved, but
Yeah, but that's the building.
that's correct.
It's the top one there.
Sorry.
It's that one.
Yeah. So you can see that this property as a whole, that you're probably well aware of, is actually a combination of different roll numbers. The properties to the north, as the assessor had mentioned, are being blended into one roll, but the subject property isn't yet, although I would suggest that it should, because you can see that it actually sits landlocked. The access required, there's one access point that comes over a separately assessed parcel, and then you'll see 2 other parcels, and these are actually necessary for the parking requirements of the units. And each cycle, we come forward to the board and we say, the city should really merge these together, but they haven't yet, and there's separate assessments on those parcels. And had this been done as one assessment, there would be no additional value. So what we ask each and every cycle is that the value already assessed on those 2 additional parcels be deducted from the subject property. Or else we have something tantamount to double taxation for those other lots.
Because there are separate taxes on those.
Yeah, separate taxes. I have those documents here for the board if they wish to see, but you can see clearly that they're separate assessments under the same ownership as the subject property, which is a Manitoba company, 5177597 Manitoba. And the assessments are issued and taxes paid for those sites. And each cycle we ask for them to be deducted, and that is typically the
Are these
case.
buildings connected?
The buildings?
Are they connected? No, they're not. Okay.
Yeah, no, there's a space just...
There's a space there. Okay, thank you.
And that could be why they haven't merged this one in with the others that are being merged. I'm not sure. In any event, there's 3 main contentions that we have with the assessed value, and that kind of gives you an overview of number 1, is that there should be, as typically done, a deduction for the already assessed values for the necessary parking lots. I'll skip ahead to page 7. And what we've done is an analysis of the actual income in place. When we value a property as fee simple by the income approach, we do follow a market approach, fee simple approach, where market rent should be applied to the property. But in our opinion, the actual leases in place are typically the best indicator of market, unless there's a reason why you would believe otherwise, such as owner-occupied space, very old leases that may be expiring quite soon, etc. So in most cases here, we've applied the actual rents. You'll see in blue for Unit 101 that we've drastically changed the $8 rent up to a market of $13. And that's because that tenant that was paying the $8 has left, and we feel that the spaces actually could command more. The end result of our analysis of the rents comes in, as you can see on page 7, at $667,000. And that's almost bang on, just slightly less than what the city has done. In other words, we don't have much contention with what the city has done for the rents. We're just slightly lower in actual. Neither do we have a contention with the vacancy allowance. At the reference date, the property was sitting at 0% vacancy, but of course it's fluctuated. Right now, or right after the, right before the reference date, they had some difficulties, and one would expect in April 2018 that they may be facing difficult times ahead as well because of the increasing supply in industrial and the increasing vacancies in retail. But for the purposes of this report, we accept 2.5% minimum vacancy allowance. The shortfall rate of 375 we feel is insufficient. And I'd like to, Mr. Chairman, make a slight revision to our presentation. I'll be seeking just a slightly higher value, and I'll explain why here. My original calculations came out just over $7 a square foot for the recoverable expenses. And as I sat here this morning going through again, I'm just under $7. So I'd like to change my shortfall rate from 7, based on actual recoverable expenses, to 6. And I'll describe the effect on page 8 to the value. What we would be asking for is not $9,247,000, but if I may ask you to correct this number, it would be $9,268,000. And that difference again is due to a dollar difference in the shortfall that I've made a revision on just now. So, number 1 condition is the deduction of the parking lots. A slight difference in the market rent, but the next major difference, I guess, is the shortfall rate from $375 to $6 a square foot. And the last revision that I would ask the board to consider is that the city's 2% structural reserve allowance, reduced from a historical 7%, is not sufficient. I'd like to draw your attention to the city's evidence, because they have a copy of the actual expense mailer. And I'll just quote you that as of the year-end closest to the reference date, December 31st, 2017, there are considerable non-recovered expenses shown at the bottom. Management fees are recovered, but if we take professional fees, asset management fees, and leasing commissions, we're at approximately $24,000. That's the actual leasing commissions and professional fees incurred before the reference date, for a property that at the time is actually performing quite well. So you can imagine if vacancies do increase, which they likely will based on history, these numbers typically increase along with it. This is why we've always been in agreement with the city's practice to allow an amortized amount for these types of expenses over the holding period of the life of the property. We don't ask that these amounts be deducted face value. We ask that an allowance be made. The 2% is not enough because we're talking about not only the capital improvements, repair of the parking lot, roof, everything else over the life of the property, but these type of expenses, which fluctuate from quite low to quite high, depending on the year. We have a separate presentation, Mr. Chairman, that I think each of the panel has. I know that we've gone through this many times, so for brevity's sake, I'll just hit upon the main points. And the main points are this. We know, even the assessor has admitted, these are real expenses. They're real at the subject property. Even at a time when there's zero vacancy, we still have these kind of expenses. Appraisal theory is very clear on this item, that an appraiser cannot ignore these types of expenses in their valuation. These expenses are typically non-recoverable from the tenant. They're not part of the leases. They're not allowed to be recovered. And I'll quote exactly from an appraisal text: leasing and capital costs, non-recoverable expenses. The appraiser should also account for non-recoverable expenses, also called non-rechargeable expenses. The most important non-recoverable costs I must be aware of are space marketing costs, which include both tenant inducements and leasing costs. We see that they're real. We've had admission that they are real. Appraisal theory tells us we must deduct this. Assessment jurisdictions across the country recognize these. We have quotes here from the Saskatchewan and Ontario assessing manuals which talk about this type of allowance that should be in place and that it refers to these non-recovered expenses. The City of Winnipeg's own assessment guidelines used to mention that this 5%, the difference between the 7 and the 2, was something that should be considered for non-recovered expenses. All that's happened is the definition of that item has disappeared. The only thing left as a reasoning of why we wouldn't include these very real expenses, which is part of appraisal theory, which is part of assessment practice, which is necessary to determine a market value, which is the basis of the legislation that we're discussing today. The only reason we've heard now is that there are board decisions which apparently give guidance to not include such costs. If I may take a moment to talk about those board decisions from the municipal board. Any of those decisions refer back to two decisions, one from 1994 regarding the Richardson Building, one from 1997 regarding the National Trust Building at 444 St. Mary. What is being asked in each of these cases, and this is very important, is that the owner's agents asked that these kind of costs be deducted face value from the rents. And in each of those cases, there was a large amount of costs being incurred to drive the rents in place at the time of valuation. $2 million in tenant leasing, tenant improvements. They wanted deducted from, let's say, the $4 million rent to come down to what's called a net effective rent. $4 million minus all your tenant improvements comes to $2 million. But I agree with the board, that's not appropriate because it's not a proper stabilization. So what the board said in the Richardson case, actually in the Richardson case decision, the very first one, the board didn't say anything because the appellants pulled their position back. And let's think about what was in evidence at the time. The assessment manual at the time even said that there's an allowance that counts for non-recovered expenses. So you can imagine the owner's agent saying, we need to deduct $2 million tenant costs, and then looking at the assessor manual and seeing that there's an amortized allowance. I see why they dropped their case, and they rightfully dropped their case. The board didn't start actually making comments until the second decision, National Trust. In that case, the agent did push forward with an exactly same case. They wanted a mass deduction from the face rents. The board said, no, we won't do that. And if we put it in context with the evidence before them, there's already an allowance in place, and it's not proper stabilization to take a lump sum deduction. Since that time, the same request has been made to the municipal board, and each time the board says, we made our decision on this. We're not deducting rent, tenant improvement costs, and leasing commissions from the face rents. Must put it in context. So what is happening is, in our position, the city is taking these quotes from the municipal board decisions out of context from what was being asked, and suggesting that provides a jurisdictional exception for the city to ignore very real expenses, contrary to appraisal theory and contrary to assessment practice, which, as you can see, results in a 5% increase to value, which is in contradiction to the whole thing that we're trying to do here today, which is determine market value as per the legislation. So my question I ask of the panel each time is, when we talk about these decisions, is it plausible that they're being taken out of context, or is it plausible that the municipal boards suggested that the city can assess at something other than market value? And I strongly suggest it's the former of those two hypotheses. In other words, there is no reason why the 7% total deduction should have been reduced to 2%. In any case, even if we didn't see them actually being incurred at the property, because it's an allowance, and they will be incurred over the life of the property. Here we actually see them. I'd like to add one more thing. If you could please turn to page 25 of our presentation. This document is provided by the owners each and every time they submit their income and expense information. It's not in the city's evidence today, unfortunately. They do this for this exact reason. They're telling the city that, look, we get $8, $9, $10, $11, $12 a square foot for these properties, but it costs us considerable amounts for the build-up. We pay for that. And in our minds, we're amortizing that over the property. You can see some of the amounts for some of the tenants on the rent roll. Elmvale Holdings at $225,000. BASF is an upper floor office, $150,000. These are not shown on the income statements. They're not being considered in the rent, and we're not asking that they be deducted. But these are the kind of costs that are real that the owner has to incur on top of the $24,000 that I mentioned on the income statement. It is completely incorrect to just disregard these kind of expenses. And again, I'm not asking that they be deducted face value, but that the very necessary allowance be reinstated for these kind of expenses. So that, Mr. Chairman, is why we are not accepting 2%, but rather the total 7%, which includes all these non-recovered and structural reserve. On the bottom of page 8 then, we have a summary of our position. The actual rents in place, and we're very close to the city did a good job on this. Slightly lower. We have no disagreement with their vacancy allowance. We have a higher shortfall rate that I've corrected now to $6 a foot. We have reinstated the 5% for what we call management non-related costs, or sorry, management non-recovered costs. We have then an NOI that we capitalize. We have no contention with the city's capitalization rate of 6.3%. But then we must deduct the assessments for the 2 additional parcels, which I have brought, if the board would like me to pass this around, but I have them here in front of me. The $66,000 for the one, and $141,000 for the second. That totals the $207,000 that we must deduct from the subject.
Give me the second number, 66,000.
Yeah, that's $66,000 for the small sliver parcel, and then kind of triangular one was $141,000.
Now, are you putting this in as evidence?
I made mention of it here, but I thought just for the board's clarity, I better.
Did you want to see this, Merrick?
What's that?
It's just simply the web pages that show these numbers.
Yeah, well, we talked about this.
Yeah.
You're okay with this?
Yep.
So do you have enough copies for
Yes, I
everybody?
do, just in
You can
case.
send them out, please.
Here, we can panel one for America.
Makes it easier to deal with.
Sure.
So, Ron, the one with the lake, is that just going to be a separate one altogether?
Yeah, right now it doesn't have the value,
Yeah,
so,
but it doesn't, eh?
no. Thank you. So the ones that we're deducting are...
The 2 ones on the bottom, yeah.
That's right.
I'm just curious about the lake though, right? Because it's there as a part of that.
It should be merged in. Yeah.
You
So
know.
I guess, and what Merrick and I have been talking about is that he agrees this should all be likely merged, but it's not in his hands, so for today we have to go through this exercise.
Well, we'll be asking some more questions about that when
Okay.
you end your presentation. Sure.
So, Mr. Chairman, what this is just simply clarification on what I described in the brief. It has these 2 assessments. You can see the assessment notices, so you can see that the registered owner is the same. And I've included an example of practice in the past where they've been deducted from the value. So once we make those revisions, Mr. Chairman, I would ask the board to consider our revised value of $9,268,000.
268?
268, that's correct. That's with the difference in the shortfall. I've increased our value slightly.
That's if we agree with the adjustment.
That's correct.
Merrick, question.
Yeah. Under the 202,990 Mville Holdings, how come you didn't adjust that rent?
That's the second floor space for, there's 2 spaces with Elmville, the main floor and the second floor.
Yep.
And the second floor space doesn't have, none of the second floor space in such a property is elevator access, which is a hindrance. One unit, they put in a lot of money for the tenant, and they get a big rent, and we haven't made any deduction to that. But this one, I would not increase the market.
And how did you come up with your new adjusted shortfall rate?
The actual expenses, and you can see this both, actually you can see it clearly on the rent roll because they'll show the recoverable charges.
Yeah.
It totals just under $7 a foot.
Okay.
I had made a mistake. I thought it was just over $7. It appears to be just under.
There's always, there's a range of them as well on the rolls, you know, anywhere between $6 and $7.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
Yep.
Some have less recovery, I think, for some admin charges.
Okay. No other questions?
Robert?
No questions.
Cynthia?
Okay, so is that generally what you've been doing with most of your properties? Have you been doing the actual shortfall rate for most of them? Or is it this one, did you do it because of some of the unique, what you're saying, some of the build-outs they've been having to do, et cetera?
Yeah, well, it's a good point. It's an exercise I always try and do, no matter what. And if it's within a fairly close range to the city's number, then it's acceptable. But sometimes you have properties that kind of are, they're not like the model. So the model, 375 is based on industrial. And when you have properties with larger build-out, the result is often higher rents, which means higher taxes, which means your expenses go up. So those are the times I really want to be careful about the shortfall allowance. And when there is a huge variance like this, it's almost double in this case, I ask for the actual to be applied.
And the parking, the land that those cars parked on, So that is being assessed at the same address as this?
Different roll numbers. They just call them zero addresses. Something about a roll number.
And this one's, it's confusing. This one's Wilkes and then everything else is Lorimer?
I know, it's strange. He tried to explain that to us. I think it was because this was the first part of the whole property that was built. So from Wilkes, it was the first building you saw.
Because you don't even, Wilkes doesn't even show up on the map.
Oh, I know, it's way up north.
Yeah.
It makes no sense. The owner actually calls this 986 to 1000 Lorimer, but the city's records still include it.
Okay, that's all I had, thanks.
The medical building, is that the same owner?
No, different number.
That's where the difference comes in. 'Cause they don't get the land benefit. But are they leasing some of the land from the medical institution as well?
Over here? No, actually, when we went out there to inspect, the medical institution has signs blocking any of their land saying, nobody can park here except our tenants.
But they're, no, it's actually the other side that's blocking it. They're preventing them from parking there. But anyway,
Yeah, from what I understand, there's...
so the L that you're talking about is just the driveway, the parking area. Is that correct? Which part, or is it the little V?
Well, the two parcels where there is parking that's required for the subject property
Yeah.
are this thin stretch that goes along Lorimer.
Thin stretch?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
You see
okay.
the cars there. And then this one that looks kind of like a triangle,
Yeah,
and you can
with
see...
the grass in between.
Yeah, and you can see on both sides there's parking, and these are part of the parking stalls for the tenants on this side of the building.
Yeah, it's them that block it, so these people don't go over there.
Oh, I see. And then the access is provided over this assessment that includes the retention pond.
And the roadways then fall under the plot where the
pond.
drainage is.
That's right. So really what should happen here is all four of these roll numbers, which would be the subject that we're discussing, the two parking lots, and the retention pond, they should all be one roll number. It's all
Well,
part and parcel of one economic unit.
but even the next one over is part of
That's
it, would have to be, because it's using the pond as well for drainage.
Yeah, no, maybe the whole thing should be blended in, that's right.
That drainage was put in for everybody.
Yeah.
Is the property to the north the same owner as well?
Yes. Actually, everything you see here, and it goes all the way up to Wilkes, is the same owner except for the medical building at the very south end.
And you said previously it had been removed? Which sheet showed us that?
In the extra evidence I have there, the very last two pages are an example of the last time this was argued. You can see Altus's position, you can see at the bottom of the valuation the deduction for the lots, and then the board's
The
decision.
very last pages?
Yeah, of the,
Oh, this?
yes.
Oh, the board did it, not the city.
That's right.
You've asked the city to do it, but the board did it.
Yeah. Well, I guess that we've requested that the city merge everything, and for some reason that hasn't happened yet. And so until that happens, we go through this exercise each and every time. When we say, can we please have them deducted then from this holding?
So if you deduct it, who's paying the tax?
No, they still pay the tax, but they pay it on those roll numbers that you see here. So they get tax bills for those two parcels.
Right, so why do we have to deduct it then?
Because it would be tantamount to double taxation otherwise. If this was merged, there would be no additional value for the parking required for the property.
But it's not merged.
No, it's unfortunate. So this is the request that we have many times when you have two parcels that are really one economic unit, and one is dependent on the other. Like the income that we're talking about today for the subject value requires parking, and part of that parking is on these other lots. So if you already tax the other lot, then the fair thing to do is deduct it from the holding which is dependent on it.
It's similar with car dealerships. So when you'll have car dealerships with low land to building ratios.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
So you're agreeing with it?
No, seriously.
Yeah,
Well,
I was trying to get my head around it too. So
Yeah.
it's, because you asked the question, and so now, so you asked the question of the assessor, would you value this as an additional land if they required it for parking, and he said no.
Right.
And so,
Yeah.
now I get your point.
So
Okay,
just
yeah.
imagine if they had
Okay.
taken these parcels and merged them into
Yes.
the roll numbers now like this, you wouldn't
They
see
wouldn't
an
be
excess
being
land.
assessed for that.
Yeah.
Right,
Okay.
because
Got it.
it's needed for the income that we're discussing and the value of.
Yeah, got it.
So how did the roadways skip out on the tax part? How did they miss that? Because there's no separate roll-on number on that, you said.
Oh, no, there is. There's a separate roll, it's just that right now it says no value posted. That's in the evidence as well.
So what happens is, and I can't explain why, but the large parcel with the lake
Yeah,
has the parking lot, like the roadway in between, so that's actually all one roll number,
yeah, with those roadways.
with
Yeah.
the roadways in between, yeah.
The third assessment in that additional package is that retention pond and roadways assessment. So it has a separate roll number, just right now it's showing no assessment, which makes me think that maybe they are looking at merging this. Because that's typically the first flag.
Yeah, I'm new to industrial,
Yeah.
and so it's, like, I'm looking at these for the first time.
Right.
Right.
So when this was purchased, it was purchased in all these individual,
No,
no, but it was,
It was all condo units.
yeah, okay, but the same purchaser bought all of this, but it was divided up in this way, and so they continue to pay the taxes on that. I got it, okay, yeah, yeah.
they will,
Yeah.
it's usually because they don't want to have the pond being
This, yeah,
taxed.
yeah.
It's usually something they give up as a park,
Right.
part of your development.
Yep, that makes
So
sense.
that could end up being the city's
Yeah.
road.
Right. Ah, that's true. So they'll have to have some sort of easements or something then for the access.
But they don't want responsibility for the roadways. That's why I'm surprised the roadways are falling into that same section.
It's strange.
And when you went and looked at it, you saw that this parking is required for the operation?
Yeah,
Okay,
it's-
all right.
Well,
No,
because it's right across, right?
Yeah.
even the medical place doesn't have
Doesn't
that
have,
parking.
yeah, that doesn't accept it.
Even though they got the internal parking, which nobody uses. Okay, I think that answers my question.
I do have one additional question though, just to ask.
Please.
Mr. Slaughter. So, if we take out the leasing commissions out of on the income expense for the non-recoverable expenses, which would make it 11,000 over the base rate of 486, the non-recoverables would be around 2%, would it not be? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but keep in mind, what the 2% currently in place, in our opinion, is reflecting is something beyond any of those expenses. It's structural reserve, which you never see hit the income statement, capital improvements of the life of the building. And secondly, I've described why I would never not consider leasing commissions intended.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
No further questions?
No
Let's
further questions.
move on. As soon as I finish parking, so that I don't lose where I am. So the next property is 920 Lorimer. You could read the roll numbers on.
File number is 192878. Roll number is 10006465-100. We have assessed value of $1,881,000. And we'd like this assessment to be confirmed based on the replot. We're requesting a 54-1.
You good with that?
Yep.
Okay. Yes. 920, right? Now we'll deal with 940.
That is correct.
I wish you'd had addresses on these.
Well, because they're the replot, right? That's why the addresses are gone.
Okay.
File number is 192879. Roll number is 10006465-000. We have a value of $6,018,000. We're asking for the value to be confirmed due to replot taking place.
Agreed?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. And the last one would be,
The last one.
960 Lorimer.
And that's 192880. Roll number is 10006465-000. $6,465,200. We have assessed value of $5,016,000. And we're asking for the value to be confirmed based on a replat.
And you're agreeing with that?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Conclude those matters. We will go back to Arlington Street, 271040.
That's correct.
And you said you have a recommendation on it?
I'll just wait for that.
That's okay.
Oh, I know, it's
It's just so it's quieter for us.
All right, thanks very much.
Thank
you.
When you're ready, Merrick.
Yep. File number is 19-1488. Roll number is 13-0717-62800. Address is 27-1040 Arlington Street. And the owner at the time, well, it's a new owner, but it's listed here as Corgill Investments Limited. Initially, we had the assessed value of $528,000. And I spoke with the owner, and he's prepared to accept my recommendation of $370,000.
And the reason?
Just based on a recent sale price.
Yeah. Okay. Everybody's okay with that? No questions? No. Thank you very much, Mayor.
No problem.
Let's take 5 minutes and then we'll come back.